Here's another morsel of true-life irony regarding Scarlet Street. The paintings you see in the film did receive an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan, but they were credited to their actual creator, legendary Hollywood painter and caricaturist John Decker. And I don't use the term legendary loosely. Decker, who was born in Berlin and served prison time in England for allegedly being a spy, led an extraordinary life that truly was the stuff of legend. He landed in Hollywood in 1929 and basically bartered his artwork for food and drink throughout the 30s, eventually falling in with a cadre of hellraisers known as the Bundy Street Boys, of which Errol Flynn, W.C. Fields, Thomas Mitchell, Anthony Quinn, and John Carradine were barely standing members. In addition to earning commissions painting faux Rembrandt-style portraits of Hollywood stars, Decker sidelined as a first-class art forger, with several of his bogus masterpieces, including a phony Picasso, allegedly hanging in various museums around America. When Fritz Lang hired Decker to produce a group of paintings in an American primitive style, the artist no doubt hit the mineral spirits as much as the oil paints as he churned out more than a dozen canvases. Decker's work is also featured in two other noir films, Brute Force and The Two Mrs. Carrolls. Hard drinking took its toll on the artist, who died in 1947 at the age of 51. Regular watchers of vintage Hollywood movies are probably wondering how this film got past the Production Code Administration. After all, Criss Cross is not technically punished for committing murder, something mandatory in films of the era. All I can figure is that the morality police, for once, understood the notion of poetic justice. In this case, that living on the streets, tortured by a guilty conscience, was punishment enough. The murder itself, however, was the subject of state-by-state censorship, as various versions of the film had Chris stabbing Kitty once, 3 times, or as in Lang's brutal first cut, 7 times. Our viewer question this week comes from Susan Pierce, who wants to know what distinguishes earlier crime and gangster movies from the films that would later be classified as noir. Well, that's a good question, Susan. For starters, let's make it clear that none of these films were called noir at the time they were made. That designation came later, even if no one agrees on a standard definition. Gangster pictures, especially those of the 1930s, are a pretty unambiguous genre. But it's instructive to note that within the trade itself, noir films of the 1940s were commonly known as crime thrillers or murder dramas. Now, typically, a crime thriller involved cops and robbers, in other words, professionals. Murder dramas, on the other hand, involved amateurs discovering just how bad they could be. Think Double Indemnity and The Postman Always Rings Twice. This was a new wrinkle in American cinema, movies in which ordinary people suddenly realized they were capable of diabolical deeds. And of course, there was the amazing cinematography, essentially a visual art movement that made crime movies from the 40s distinct from anything seen on American movie screens before. Now, if you have a question you'd like me to answer on air, or perhaps you'd like to find fellow noir fiends and get into the conversation, use #NoirAlley on Twitter. Next week, I'll be back with another edition of Noir Alley, presenting what many fans of both sports and movies consider the best boxing movie ever made. Until then, paint it black.